Okay, so we got a recording in progress. There are some Canadian geese flying behind me. See how am I doing?
I thought that was V's chair for a second. I saw it going this way, that way. I was like, damn, V, some WD-40 or something.
Yeah, we're in my backyard right now.
I know. I love the view, by the way. It looks so nice.
Thank
I
you.
know.
Thank you. I'm rearranging. This would normally be my office, but say we're rearranging some things. It's just not pleasant to look at.
Yeah, I mean, rearrange nature, it's probably a lot of work.
Yeah. Okay, so just to get started on this, and I hope this will be of interest to those who would otherwise be here if we were meeting in person or just for whatever reason couldn't make it but still want to participate in this. Welcome to this workshop on reading philosophical texts. And there's a little bit of a wind picking up right now. Is it coming? Is it being picked up by the microphone at all?
A little bit, but it's not like,
Nothing
yeah.
crazy.
Let me move a little bit closer so you can hear me a little clearer. Okay, so audios are pretty good?
Yep.
Okay, very good. So the purpose of this is just to provide certain tips, certain bits of advice to aid you if you need any aid in reading philosophy, because it can be pretty intimidating. Just speaking for myself, that if you have ever internalized people making criticisms about you, whether it's from your parents or from your teachers, and they, intimate somehow that they doubt that you will be able to do something difficult. Once you begin reading primary texts in philosophy, say all of that kind of like internalized self-doubt and self-deprecation can come back very strongly, and it can kind of like halt you in your tracks and say, there's no way I can read this. There's no way that I can read this and then tackle the next one and then tackle the next one and tackle the next one. Well, I'm here to tell you that say it's not, that can happen, but it's not anything that's going to necessarily stop you totally, and I'm kind of living proof of that. So we are reading a text for this workshop, and we'll go through the this workshop will probably extend, hopefully anyway, will extend past maybe the end of the semester, maybe into the summer, maybe into a future semester beyond that. But the text that I picked for beginning this workshop is fairly short. It's a paper. It's not a chapter or a book, and it's written, I think, in fairly easy English. One of the many qualities, admirable qualities of this philosopher was that he was very concerned about writing in a kind of way that people could understand, that they wouldn't be bogged down with too many technicalities, say strange locutions and so on, which is something philosophers can often fall into. As a matter of fact, they can often use that as a way of disguising the fact that they have no, the logical glue that should be there in their argument is not actually there at all. But McTaggart, like one of his heroes, Gottfried Leibniz, was a connoisseur of glue, and want to make sure to say that you can see just how all the parts are supposed to be worked together very strongly. So I have a little picture of McTaggart. He looks a fair amount like a balding Oliver Hardy, and he lived through the end of the Victorian era into the Edwardian, and he died in the mid-1920s. When he was still at the height of his powers, he suffered a short illness and died right at the time that he was editing the second and final volume of his magnum opus, which I happen to have a copy of right here. It's called The Nature of Existence. And I wanted to draw your attention to the title page, where you can see the man's name in full, John McTaggart Ellis McTaggart. Now, he was born John McTaggart Ellis. McTaggart was his mother's maiden name, but in order to receive a legacy from a relative of that family, they had to adopt the name McTaggart as the last name. And so John McTaggart Ellis became John McTaggart Ellis McTaggart. Now, what I think is extraordinary is this is not the only time this happened to a British idealist like McTaggart, not even just a British idealist, but a personalist idealist. The Scottish philosopher Andrew Seth also changed his last name to receive a legacy, and so he's now known as Andrew Seth Pringle Pattison. So I'm looking to see if I could find a third instance of that happening, because it's just so extraordinary that it would happen twice to philosophers with a very similar kind of philosophy. Now, McTaggart was an idealist. He believed, say, in his understanding of idealism is that reality is basically spiritual. When they mean spiritual, they don't mean spiritual in the sense of religiosity, or even say that there is a divine presence involved. As a matter of fact, McTaggart denied the existence of God. He regarded the God as an impossibility. But he did believe that, say, what everything is essentially are selves and parts of selves. Say the spiritual nature of reality comes in it being composed of activities of experience, of perception, of enjoyment, and particularly of value and valuation. And this puts him, say, within the idealist tradition, which includes other British idealists like James Ward and so forth, and another really important British idealist, F.H. Bradley, also regarded reality as being basically experiential. But he's of a different kind of tradition from a lot of idealist philosophers, say like of Hegel or of Bradley or of another contemporary, Bosanquet, in that rather than being a monist and regarding as everything as just kind of like aspects of the one unitary substance of reality, of actual reality, McTaggart was a pluralist idealist, much in the way that Leibniz was a pluralist, that the selves and parts of selves, while connected, are not reducible to each other as one just unity that is the truest being of existence. The truest being its unification. No, say the truest being is for McTaggart, say the fact that we have, say, selves that actually do have a distinct individual and singular nature, even when they are of necessity connected to other selves. So he is a pluralist idealist. He's kind of an interesting combination of both Leibniz's pluralism, but also with Spinoza's determinism, as we will see in this in his paper on the unreality of time. And I have that paper collected here in this very nice edition called Philosophical Studies. I don't know whether the whether the camera is reversing the image at your end right now. Okay, yeah, it's flipped around right now. Okay, so yeah, it's
philosophical. Yeah, just like upside down.
I think the book's upside down. Like, okay. There we go.
There we go. Okay, but the I'm reading it backwards right now. Can you does it read in the correct direction for you guys? Okay, all right, very good. Glad to hear that. All right, so this very nice collection here is Philosophical Studies. It has a lot of his most important papers in it, including the unreality of time. So that's what I'm going to be working for with this. And if you are interested in a refutation of McTaggart, I have a very good book here by another favorite philosopher of mine, Errol E. Harris. He's much more of an idealist in kind of like the monistic tradition of Hegel. But as you can see, it's called The Reality of Time. And if you are familiar with Anglophone philosophy, you know exactly who he's trying to answer right there. Say that the title itself is kind of a throwing down the gauntlet at McTaggart's feet. Say rather than say argue for time's unreality, I'm going to argue for time's reality. Okay, so let's get started. Let's get started with the paper. So my idea is to go through the paper paragraph by paragraph and see if we can like find some things about it that might be stumbling blocks to continuing on with it, or that it might be, where I would say, here's where we got to pause and do some work. Pause and do some work now, which may help us later on as we progress through it. Okay, so let me open it up right now. And actually, did either of you guys have a chance to read it on your own?
Sorry, I haven't read it on my own yet.
Okay.
I forgot that was happening today, but then 30 minutes before, prior to this whole meeting, I started reading it. I got a couple of paragraphs into it, so I like what I'm reading so far. It's very very interesting.
Very good, very good. Yeah, and that's okay. Like I said, that reading it beforehand was not a requirement for participating in this workshop. It's just if you wanted to do it, you had a chance to do it. Okay, so we're going to go through it paragraph by paragraph. If you have the text in front of you, and anytime you want to interrupt, raise your hand, or have a question, please go right ahead. Okay, so this paper was written in, I believe, 1908, and it was, or 1908, 1909, I can't remember actually, but it was a submission to a very important philosophical journal called Mind, and it was a journal both of psychology and of philosophy, particularly of metaphysics, in England, in Great Britain. And in Great Britain at the time, say, there was, say, a great resurgence of idealist philosophy, which had kind of died away for the most part on the European continent. And then there were very important new, strong idealist philosophers in England. But by the time that McTaggart is writing this paper, there's already some very strong challenges coming from what are called the new realist philosophers. Say this would have been about the time where Bertrand Russell will be writing his first important works, as well as G.E. Moore. And this is after John Cook Wilson has already had a very decisive influence over a lot of students in Great Britain, trying to turn them away from what he regarded as idealism's tendency to regard everything in existence as just kind of like, kind of like a reiteration of how the mind understands it. That's not exactly fair, but it's still a very strong argument. Okay, so let's progress through this. So the unreality of time. It doubtless seems highly paradoxical to assert that time is unreal, and that all students which involve its reality, and all statements which involve its reality are erroneous. Such an assertion involves a far greater departure from the natural position of mankind than is involved in the assertion of the unreality of space or the unreality of matter. So decisive a breach with the natural position is not to be lightly accepted. And yet in all ages, the belief in the unreality of time has proved singularly, that's always been a hard word for me, singularly attractive. Now, just kind of like a heads up, McTaggart is not going to, of course, argue for the plausibility of time's unreality by citing historical precedent. He's going, as he's going to say a little bit later on, he's got his own reasons that are going to be different from those that have been asserted in the past. But he does, he is writing for an audience where, you do have to kind of like acclimate them a little bit, and seeing that this is, that if other say serious thinkers have considered time's nature and have regarded it as being unreal, well, perhaps I should get over my prejudices a little bit and think a little bit harder on the matter myself. Okay. In the philosophy and religion of the East, we find that this doctrine is of cardinal importance. Now, again, going back to McTaggart's place in history, that when he's talking about, say, the East to an audience of Anglophone readers, of British and American readers, he kind of expects you already to have an idea about what the East is and what the East's religion and philosophy is, which is probably very basic and also probably very inaccurate in a lot of its most important details. But you can imagine, say, what he's talking about right there is perhaps Hinduism, or even Buddhism. Probably Hinduism rather than Buddhism. Hinduism was better understood, or at least better, at least kind of like better acknowledged as a thing that exists than Buddhism was. And so he's thinking that, say, ultimate reality would be, say, a matter of kind of like, within the dream of Brahma, or something like that, where all distinctions, all individuations, including those that you find in between temporal and spatial positions, are in fact just illusory. Okay. And going on. And in the West, where philosophy and religion are less closely connected, we find the same doctrine continually recurs, both among philosophers and among theologians. Theology never holds itself apart from mysticism for any long period, and almost all mysticism denies the reality of time. In philosophy, again, time is treated as unreal by Spinoza, by Kant, by Hegel, and by Schopenhauer. I got to pause right there because McTaggart made his name in British philosophy as a scholar of Hegel, but his way of reading Hegel is very much kind of like McTaggart reading himself into Hegel. And so, like I said here, Errol Harris is very much a Hegelian philosopher, and he's going to try to kind of like correct what he regards as McTaggart's overreading of his own philosophy into Hegel's philosophy. So when he says Hegel regarded time as unreal, that's something that a lot of Hegel scholars, including myself when I used to be a Hegel scholar, would look at and say, where are you getting that from? Okay. And also when he says that time is unreal for Kant, time is one of the manifolds of apperception, but it's to say that means we can conclude that beyond how our understanding is organized, that we know that it's false. That's also going a little too far. But I do believe that, say, he's quite correct in saying that it is ultimately unreal for Spinoza, who is, it would just be kind of like, say, just a relationship within the one substance. And so if you look at that one substance in its entirety, no, there is no before and after, no past, present, and future. It's all there at once. And that's also the case for Schopenhauer as well. In the philosophy of the present day, the two most important movements, excluding those which are yet merely critical, are those which look to Hegel and to Mr. Bradley. So that's F.H. Bradley. That's the other really, really important British idealist philosopher of his era. And both of these schools deny the reality of time. Such a concurrence of opinion cannot be denied to be highly significant, and is not the less significant because the doctrine takes such different form, and is supported by such different arguments. I believe that time is unreal, but I do so for reasons which are not, I think, employed by any of the philosophers whom I have mentioned, and I propose to explain my reasons in this paper. And this is true. They say he's going to do what is a very original refutation of time. And what makes it more significant than even his conclusion is the way in which he describes time. More than anything else about this paper, or even about McTaggart's philosophy in terms of its overall impact in the history of philosophy, is the way in which he describes time rather than his conclusions about the way in which he describes, say, the A and the B series of time as usually going together or necessarily going together in our understanding of time. Positions in time, as always, appear to us be prima facie, as time appears to us prima facie, are distinguished in two ways. Was that?
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. V actually looked like she had a question for you. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
please go ahead.
Oh yeah, it wasn't something too important, but I when you talk about how what's different about his doctrine is more so his definition in time for time, kind of reminds me that a lot of times one I think one of the stumbling blocks that I have with reading philosophy is not even be able to conceive the kind of thing that they're talking about because you're so stuck in the more common way of understanding, say something like time, space, matter, whatever it is. You're so already so stuck in that definition of your own that it kind of blocks you from imagining what this philosopher is even talking about. So even when like you understand, sort of what they're trying to say, it just still doesn't make sense until way later when you kind of like more adopted to that, I think.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think it's a virtue of what McTaggart does in his paper and pretty much everywhere in his philosophy is that he is tries very carefully to situate your understanding along his own by telling you, here's what I mean by this. You know, you might have your own understanding of time, you might have your own understanding of personality or space or matter or anything like that, but here's kind of like the what seems to be our normal shared understanding of it, and here's how it kind of like breaks down into its component features. Here's how all those here's what would have to be included in those things in order for those ideas to work. Now, that makes them, I think, unfortunately, unusual amongst philosophers. That just as we said, you're just kind of like thrown in, and you're expected to be kind of like say not just a beginner reader in terms of their language, in terms of their concepts, or even just kind of like the background that they are writing from, but they assume that it's almost as if they're just kind of like writing to themselves as like a long extended note. Here's just kind of like me writing to myself as an ideal audience. Now, that's okay if you are dealing with an audience that more or less have the same kind of background and the same kind of understanding of certain terms and whatnot. But that comes through going through many years as a philosopher. That comes through going through many years reading the same material as everyone, talking about the same topics and whatnot, knowing what the field is working on and so on. So it doesn't really it's not unfortunately much of philosophy is never takes kind of like the beginner reader in consideration the way that McTaggart does. And one thing to kind of like keep in mind is that they had to get there, that they had to get to that point of being able to talk about these things with their kind of language and their certain kinds of ways of conceiving and so forth. They did not already begin that way, but it can feel like you've just stepped into a conversation where everyone knows what they're talking about, and you feel like, well, I should have known this right from the beginning, right? Like you people. But that's not the case. They will give you that impression, but it's a false impression. The false impression being that they already have this kind of understanding to begin with, and that you are somehow at fault for not already thinking these things the same way that they do. They were taught to think this kind of way, to develop this kind of way of thinking about certain things and of describing certain things a certain kind of way and speaking about them, communicating to others about them through a long process. And it was a hard process too. It would be no more easy for them to get to that point than it would be you from at that starting point. Okay. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another big problem with reading philosophy too, is just kind of like assuming, say, that it's kind of like criticizing you. Whatever you're reading is kind of like I said, you get that same kind of like internalized self-deprecation coming back, where you feel like you're being put down for not understanding what they're talking about. Well, don't be intimidated. They had to get to that point too, and if they treat you as if it's so unfortunate that you're so benighted and ignorant to begin with, well, that's on them. That's on them. That's them being a bad philosopher, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. By the way, that little bit of Latin right there, and I'm no Latin scholar, so I don't know if my pronunciation is correct. But when I see that, when I read that, say positions in time as appears to us as prima facie or prima facie, that means on the face of it, or that on the surface. Say the first level, prima, say facie, say the facade, the level, say the starting point that you're beginning with. So that's what we mean by that. So they're saying positions in time appear to us at first glance as distinguished in two ways. Each position is earlier than some and later than some of the other positions. And each position is either past, present, or future. The distinction of the former class are permanent, while those of the latter are not. If M is ever earlier than N, it is always earlier. But an event which is now present was future and will be past. Okay, again, so this is the most famous part of the paper, is how he is explaining these two ways of normally conceiving time as things being before and after, or earlier and later, and say in position in terms of a sequence of future, present, past. The earlier and later, or before and after, he says they're permanent. That they are always going to be of positions that do not change. Caesar crossing the Rubicon came earlier than Washington crossing the Delaware. That's always going to be true. That's always going to be, say, within those positions in time. One came before and the other came afterwards. Us having this discussion right now, this workshop right now, this is happening before a future event, but it's happening after Trump's indictment by the Manhattan grand jury. So these are positions in time that will not change. But there's another way of thinking of time where the positions do change and are constantly changing, say of past, present, and future. The moment in which I'm talking right now, it's happening. Then while I paused, it went by. And now it just keeps on receding into the past. Say what was present becomes past, what was future becomes present, what was present then becomes past, and it keeps flowing like that. So one is a conception of time in terms of permanent and unalterable positions relative to each other. And of the other one is kind of like of changing positions or flows of times. Now, of course, when we're talking about, say, past, present, and future, when is the present? So, well, that's the now. Well, what I just said was now just went away. So in philosophy, they've come up with a term called the specious present. The specious present is supposed to be kind of like your awareness of the now, but also kind of like the awareness itself is of a past. You're just kind of like, awareness, you have an awareness of a now that just happened. So you're actually kind of like more looking at the past than regarding the present. So that's how slippery time is on this conception. Okay, so how are we doing so far? And we'll just do like a few more paragraphs, and then we'll table it and come back a little bit later. But it's important to at least kind of like get so far as to when he talks about, say, the difference between the A series and the B series. Okay, so how are we doing so far? Okay, very good, excellent. Since distinctions of the first class are permanent, that's the before, after, earlier, later, they might be held to be more objective and to be more essential to the nature of time. I believe, however, that this would be a mistake, and that the distinction of past, present, and future is as essential to time as the distinction of earlier and later, while in a certain sense, as we shall see, it may be regarded as more fundamental than the distinction of earlier and later. And it is because the distinction of past, present, and future seem to me to be essential for time that I regard time as unreal. Okay, so he's doing some very, very, very good things right here in laying down what's going to be important for his argument. And notice what he does right here. If you're looking at the text, you know, if it's what you're seeing is kind of like a facsimile of what I'm looking at, is when he says the word essential, that's italicized, and so is the word fundamental. When you read through a philosophical text, always make sure to kind of like take note of when they're italicizing something. That's where they're trying to make sure the reader sees that as something that's going to be important, especially if they want to like draw a comparison between those two things. If he says that both earlier and then later and past, present, and future are essential for conceptions of time, but one of them is more fundamental for an idea of time. That's going to be really important because, as he's going to say, it's that more fundamental idea of past, present, and future, which is going to show, according to McTaggart, that time is unreal. For the sake of brevity, I shall speak of the series of positions running from the past through the near past, from the past, let me try that again. For the sake of brevity, I shall speak of the series of positions running from the far past through the near past to the present, and then running from the present to the near future and the far future as the A series. The series of positions which runs from earlier to later, I shall call the B series. Okay, so A series, that's past, present, and future, and that's the flowing nature of time. B series, that's the permanent relative positions of earlier and later, or before and after. The contents of a position in time are called events. The contents of a single position are admitted to be properly called a plurality of events. And he says here, parenthetically, I believe, however, that they can as truly, though not more truly, be called a single event. This view is not universally accepted, and it is not necessary for my argument. And he goes on to say a position of time is called a moment. Okay, so once again, he's trying to make sure that we are dealing with a shared kind of vocabulary here and why it's being used. We're calling, say, certain kinds of things about time events, and also certain things about time, we're calling them moments. So when he's talking about, say, what does time consist of? When he's talking about, say, the contents of time, he's talking about events. So we can say Washington crossing the Delaware, Trump getting indicted. All these things in which we can describe what has happened in time are events in time. But how they relate to other events, those are their positions in time. So right now, me talking right now, that is an event, and its position in the A series is of present, then running into the past, and then comes an event, in the, because an event came in the future to supplant it. Yeah. But say the, me talking right now, that came later than Trump's indictment. So those two events have two positions, one earlier and the other later. And I'll just do let's see here. Let me just do 3 more paragraphs. The first question which we must consider is whether it is essential to the reality of time that its events should form an A series as well as a B series. And it is clear to begin with that we never observe time except as forming both of these series. We perceive events in time as being present, and those are the only events which we perceive directly. And all other events in time which by memory or inference we believe to be real are regarded as past or future. Those earlier than being the present being past, and those later than the present being future. Thus, the events of time as observed by us form an A series as well as a B series. Okay, so in that paragraph right there, he's saying that when we're trying to kind of like take stock of what we are experiencing regarding time and time's nature, He's talking about, say, that, we're dealing with both present experiences, direct experiences, but also indirect experiences. Memories, for instance. I remember Trump being indicted yesterday. As a matter of fact, I probably will never forget that. But my experience of that event is not direct in that I'm not experiencing that event right now. What I'm experiencing right now is, say, perceptions of the present moment, which include the memory of that event. So I have the perceptions of what I'm seeing right now as part of this event, and that I'm also having perceptions right now of what happened in the past. Okay, so when we have the idea of before and after, earlier than later, as well as past, present, and future, they're going to be involving these different kinds of perceptions, say direct and indirect perceptions. Perceptions of the present moment, which are direct, and perceptions that are indirect, which are memories and possibly even anticipations too. It is possible, however, that this is merely subjective. It may be the case that the distinction introduced among positions in time by the A series, past, present, and future, the distinction of past, present, and future, is simply a constant illusion of our minds, and that the real nature of time only contains the distinction of the B series, the distinction of earlier and later. In that case, we could not perceive time as it really is, but we might be able to think of it as it really is. This is not a very common view, but it has found able supporters. I believe it to be untenable because, as I said above, it seems to me that the A series is essential to the nature of time, and that any difficulty in the way of regarding the A series as real is equally a difficulty in the way of regarding time as real. Okay, now notice that he's changed his wording there a little bit, that in the earlier paragraph, he said that both the A series and the B series are essential to our normal thinking of time, but the A series is more fundamental. Here he is saying that the A series is essential, but what you have to keep in mind is that he means essential kind of like in the sense of it being of kind of like of the primary kind of importance. That while both are necessary for the thinking of time, say one of them is the sufficient reason. That is to say, it is really the reason that explains what it would mean to be in time. And it'll be for that reason that he's going to say that time is not real. Okay, so we'll pause right there in the reading, but let me know, guys, is there anything kind of like in the way in which the argument is going so far that is kind of like picking up on things that you might have found kind of like, difficult in this or other kinds of works in philosophy? Or if you just want to talk about, say, where you've run into trouble reading philosophy, we can talk about that too.
I was wondering if you can explain again on this paragraph says, sorry, let me
No problem.
try to find it again. Only singular. I think when he talked about like the singular plural events and single position. Oh, I found it. Okay. So the series of the contents of a position in time are called events, and the contents of a single position are admitted to be properly called plurality of events. I don't know if I fully understand that part.
Okay, so what he's saying right here, the contents of a position in time are called events. The contents of position in time are called events. The contents of a single position are admitted to be properly called a plurality of events. And what he means right there is that in any event of time, there is a multitude of content in it. Let's say that in kind of like, in the present moment right now, there is not just me talking, but also the wind blowing through my hair, and also me looking at the screen right now. So all of those can be thought of as themselves a plurality of different events that all have a similar kind of position in terms of its present nature. You know, we're not looking very closely into like relativity theory right now. Although interestingly enough, Einstein and his pal Kurt Gödel were very familiar with McTaggart's arguments, and they both said, "Yeah, I think McTaggart's right. Time's not real." But say that we'll get to that later. We'll get to that later. But what they're talking about right now is just to say that in any event, you can understand it both in terms of like a one event, like this moment right now, the content is all the things that are happening, or that in this moment right now, in this position right now, there are many things happening. So all of those things could be considered events themselves.
Is it like when you're watching a TV show, like there's one episode of what the TV show is going to be about, and then you can watch what's inside the episode of like what events are happening inside that singular episode?
Yeah,
Like,
you can think about
yeah.
that way. You can think, say, if you're thinking about, say, that episode is the one event.
Yeah, the one single event, and then inside of it's going to be the plurality of events inside that event.
Right. So you can think about that as just one event itself containing all of those things, or you can think of that as just kind of like, you know, within this position of time, there's this episode, and this episode contains all of these events within it. So it's kind of like just a matter of how are we analyzing these positions and times? What's its content? What does it contain? Does it contain just kind of like a one thing with different aspects, or are they many things in relation, all connected as being part of this one position?
I'm so glad you asked a question on that too, V, because when I first read it too, like beforehand, I was so confused at just it's the single position into the plurality of events. I'm like, what does that even mean? But you broke it down very nicely, McHugh. Thank you very much.
No problem, no problem. Well, say that's why we're doing this, because I can do this because I've read this several times already. But say if you're just coming to this, I do think that this is a moment where maybe McTaggart could have done things a little bit more clearly by adding examples. And McTaggart is usually very good at adding examples to kind of like flesh out what he's talking about. But in this, you can see that he's just kind of like bringing it up because he's thinking, well, I know someone's going to mention this, so I'm just going to get it out of the way. That it is not as essential to the argument that he's making as to think about, say, whatever we're talking about, whether we're talking about, say, one thing with many things inside of it, or many things that are connected by just their temporal relation to other things. Say, it's more about kind of like the positionality that we're talking about. Say, whether we're talking about, say, one things or a plurality of things, it's how they're related in time that matters to the argument right now. Hey, there's a kitty cat.
I also really liked how he was saying that the A series is the fundamental or the essential property that makes him think that time is not real. Then he also goes on to say that that it could also just be like a subjective experience that I don't even know how I'm trying to describe this, but it's the way he said it at one point during the end that like how is he gonna try to tie that in together, you know?
Yeah. So when he says that's untenable, you know, he pretty much is just saying right now that even if it's just kind of like, you know, a matter of subjective illusion that you have these kinds of flows of past, present, and future, or that you know, what seems to be past and present are, you know, it's just kind of like, you know, one eternity of one single kind of experience. Now McTaggart, he's going to come down to a position where he's going to say, no, there is no time, but there are these permanently related experiences. So where that position comes into, where there's just kind of like, you know, this undivided event of that's just kind of like, you know, an illusion of the mind. That's where you're kind of like thinking that where you're getting kind of like more in the monistic direction, or even of a solipsistic direction, where everything is just your one mind, your one experience, and it's just an undivided stream of experience. There's no real kind of like separation except separation by illusion. And he says, no, that's not true. There's before, we have different events. We have, we got Washington crossing the Delaware, and we've got that cat that just jumped behind V right there. Those are real things that are happening or have happened. It's just a matter of kind of like saying, are they things that are in time, or are they real events that are not in time? Because interestingly enough, he is going to kind of like come down and say that there is such things are events, and that they are there is content to reality that is distinctive from other content and are related to each other in a different kind of way. It's just a matter of whether there's any change. That's where the key thing is going to come in. The key thing is going to be change. Whether change is something that's real, or is it just an error of judgment? Yeah. He goes even further than that in his magnum opus, and he says that even when you think that you're making a judgment, that is in fact an error. There are no judgments. There are only perceptions. So when you perceive something as a judgment, you are in fact committing an error. How do you commit? How do you say discern, say, error from not error without judgment? Well, he tries mightily. He tries mightily to get around that. Say, we're talking about a first-rate philosopher that I think a lot more people should have a lot more respect for beyond just the A and the B series. And did you have any questions, V?
No, not directly for this text, but I can't remember one thing that's kind of hard for me. I find in reading philosophy is a lot of times the in the usually in the first part of whatever text it is, the philosopher usually laid out the definitions right from the start, right? So one example I think of is I was reading Spinoza Ethics, and it's regardless of it is very, very hard to read, but it's not just the content, but just also the fact that like he defined so much and he enumerate everything right from the first like couple pages, and then go on to give the proofs for that. But the problem is I don't remember all of those definitions. I don't remember what he meant by this, so I just keep having to go back and forth, and it just takes so much time to have to do that.
and I wish I could tell you that there was an easier way to do it, but that's it. You just got to keep going back and forth between, say, between the two until you can remember how they connect together. And it's one of the reasons why almost no one has ever done a Euclidean demonstration of a metaphysical argument before, and why no one has done it since then, because it is very cumbersome and it is very time consuming. When I actually think that, say, when he's working on it, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier because you already pretty much have the much of it figured out anyway. So you already kind of like have the mental connections between, say, all of these things in advance before you actually commit it to paper. Reading it's a different story. And so Spinoza is notoriously difficult because of that. And this is why Errol Harris right here, he was also a very, very good Spinoza scholar, and he wrote a couple of books on Spinoza. One of them particularly, Salvation from Despair, which I think is a very, very good book. So one thing to look out for in reading philosophy, particularly of primary texts, or trying to find good commentators on these texts. It's not cheating, and it's not an admittance of weakness either, because lo and behold, you might be able to find, after reading through both the primary text and the supplementary text, that, hey, I don't think this person was right. I don't think this person was right to read it this way. You can still form a strong individual reading of a major primary text, even with help. And so it's not an admittance of defeat, and it's not admittance, and also you have to admit you're a student. This is what you have to do as a student. So you got to read what's out there that will help you get through these things, because as you pointed out, V, it takes a lot of time. And you've got, unfortunately, time is against you in terms of getting enough read and understood to progress on to the next step in the discipline. So it's actually a time-saving device to read a primary text along with a supplementary one, say a good commentator or a good secondary literature, if it's going to help you get through it, because you can get bogged down and you can despair. Again, so Spinoza is supposed to save us from despair, but you can start to despair. You can start to feel discouraged, and that will take you out of it. That'll take more time to get back into it. So it's a way of kind of like pacing yourself and of learning how to progress to the next stage. So I would say like find there are good Wikipedia articles out there. They're all of them too brief, but they're a good way to get started. They're a good way to get started, and then kind of like move on to say something more thorough, like if you've ever been to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy website. It is an extensive website containing articles on major philosophers, major topics, major works, major problems, major questions, major periods in the history of philosophy. All of it say, look at that beautiful kitty cat. All the articles are very rich. I'm not going to say they're all correct, because that's always the gamble you take. Whatever you read might have some problems with it, no matter whether it's by a very respected scholar or by say just a student doing student work. They can always slip into some kind of problem. So it's a gamble that that everyone takes and everyone has to take. So yeah, so look through some look through some secondary sources, especially when you're dealing with say someone who's done something as eccentric as Spinoza has, because there's really nothing in his philosophy that necessitates the way in which he tries to demonstrate it. It doesn't become any more necessary and valid through geometrical demonstration than if he just kind of like laid it out on the page as people normally do. Right. He just wanted to show that his way of thinking through it was as rigorous as say the definitions, the axioms, definitions, and proofs in Euclid's Elements.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Yeah. Any other kind of like things in like getting through philosophy?
No, not that. But I was actually sorry, it's a little off topic. Is there a meeting today for Philosophy Club?
Yeah, I'm gonna be on call at 2. I don't know who's coming.
Yeah.
We're probably gonna do AI. If it's just like you and I, we could just like talk about something. It doesn't have to be that. Yeah. But I'm gonna be on call. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure. Like, I didn't know if I was gonna go get gas or anything right now.
Yeah.
I think I'll just stay here.
Myself, I'm not going to be able to make the meeting today.
Yeah.
And next week, I'm going to be in San Francisco. So I won't be able to attend, say, either next Friday, say the Friday of next week's meeting, or even do this next Friday either. But we'll come back. We'll reconvene on this, I guess, 2 weeks from now.
Yes.
Okay.
This really was a great read, by the way. Thank you so much.
No problem. And if we want to kind of like continue on with this into like the summer, or like do a different text if we finish McTaggart before the semester ends, and say I'm very, very happy to do that.
I would too.
Okay. All right. And also if we do continue on, I would like it to be kind of like a text that you guys would choose since
Oh.
I've already had my fun.
Honestly, I like your options right now, so I bet you have some other great ones. Pretty excited for it.
Well, we'll see. Like I said, you take
Yeah.
a gamble. I'll probably do something stupid, a stupid choice, I should say.
Imagine.
Yeah. Well,
All
we'll
right.
see. We'll see.
Thank you so much again.
And thank you. All right, guys. So thank you for showing up. And so I would send you the video then, V, and you would post it on the Discord.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where so if you're watching, that's where you are. Okay, so take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right, and thank you, V.
Yeah, no problem.